Magic the Gathering World's Championship has completed. Are we going to get a ban? Let's look at the deck and see where the problems lie. Well, I've imported the winning deck into my arena account, and I gotta say, there's nothing too surprising in this. It's nothing too crazy. Where do the problem cards actually lie? Well, the first thing that I see with the problem cards for the way Standard is right now probably has to come down to the land base and how easy it is to go multi-colors. I am your host, Cindershadow of Cindershadow Gaming, so if you like this type of video, let me know down below. I will continue to do things like this. I am a Magic the Gathering enthusiast. I've been with the game since 93, 94, since it was out there. I've been around for the ups and the downs, and I've even walked away from the game at many times. So this type of thing comes as a natural flow for me. So if you guys want a little bit of insight of where I sit and where I look at the decks nowadays, this is the place to do it. Going forward, I will try and do this if you guys like this type of thing. If not, I will continue with the pop culture route that we are going with the channel. Anyway, the award-winning deck by Yuta Takahashi, I believe is his name, was named Is It Dragons. Why is it named Is It Dragons? Well, it's based off Goldspan Dragon and Dragon's Fire. And those two are not Dragon's Fire, Smoldering Egg. Dragon's Fire just happens to be named Dragon. Smoldering Egg turns into an Ashmount Dragon. These two dragons together are very powerful, and this creates more spells, better spells, trigger spells. They create a scenario where casting all these spells just do massive and massive amounts of damage. Now, where do the problem cards lie? Well, one of the problem cards right now is Alrund's Epiphany. It's up there in the list of cards that people want banned. It's in about 35% of decks right now, I believe, is what it's been broken down to. Yeah, 35.7. I'm using stats from top 8. They list all the tournaments for the last 2 months and pool it together on who's using what cards are on the top decks, and who's using the most cards. So they pool that data together quite nicely for me. Goldspan Dragon is also a very powerful card, and if last I checked, Goldspan Dragon was somewhere upwards to like $45, where Epiphany is up there at only about $20 right now, is what they're listing it as. But yeah, both these cards combined are very powerful. They're both mythics. They're very powerful and effective mythics. But are they the problem? Goldspan Dragon being 5 mana to cast, that's not unheard of. Alrund's Epiphany being 7 mana, or sometimes 6 if you are to foretell it, is that the actual problem? And honestly, those are them being high casted like this. Are they, like, you look at Goldspan Dragon and the last 5 mana dragon, really, if you look back in the early days of Magic, you look back to Shivan Dragon, and that was a 5/5 that had the fire breathing ability where you could pump enough mana into it and it can do massive amounts of damage. Back in those days, you used to have this Shivan Dragon, and it would wreck your face. It would eat your decks, and you would have nothing left of them because you would be a smoldering pile of Dragonfire ash. And now we have the Goldspan Dragon, and the Goldspan just produces mana instead of producing fire. So I think that's the bigger problem that we're seeing with the current standard meta. Them having cards like these pathways, the pathways themselves, when I saw them, I was like, these things are going to be a problem. I wouldn't be surprised if these things start skyrocketing in value. People have yet to really catch on to these pathways, and they're great for Commander. They're great for, I would even say they're good for Modern, because they come into play untapped. They're great for standard right now. Pioneer would probably love these things. And it's the fact that you have A or B, and they come in untapped. If they came in tapped, then there would have been a much better scenario for these pathways and a much better place. We wouldn't see the consistency that we see with them. The snarls, we've seen these things in the past. This is just a different version of them. Those aren't so much of a problem. I believe the pathways are more of a problem. These at least have a restrictiveness to them. They can come into play on, don't really come into play untapped unless you are holding a card in your hand. So now you're giving up info. So I don't have a problem with the snarls. I've had a problem with the pathways for a long time. What makes these decks very powerful is the fact that they can produce a massive amount of mana in the form of what's considered a treasure. These treasure tokens, because they've gone all in on them, have made it very difficult to not run them, especially in the standard meta right now. Treasure tokens are the key to success right now if you're running anything, and the biggest color that's producing treasures is red. Green produces long-lasting mana sources, things that come from nature and they sprung up and you can always use them, where red has this short burst, and red has always had a short burst of things, but they've really taken the aggro side of red and turned it into a short burst of mana. And that short burst of mana, even though it's short burst, it makes it more effective. It's more easier to have a mana base, and going forward it makes it very difficult. So all of that said, where are the actual problems? Well, the pathways themselves are a problem, but we're going to have to deal with them. I don't see them banning five or is it 10 pathways? I don't even know how many pathways there are now. There's either 5 or 10 in the meta right now, or in the sets legal right now. And the pathways themselves, I've said from day one, are going to be a giant problem. The Goldspan Dragon, if someone targets it and then they're able to produce a mana or produce a treasure that they can then sacrifice for 2, is a giant glaring problem with this card. And the fact that it has haste also, it just creates a discount on mana, and it creates this giant discount on your cards, and it just makes it that much easier to produce mana. We're coming off the time where we had Wilderness Reclamation and Fires of Invention, where both of those gave you free access to mana. And once again, free access to mana is the problem. Being anything that's creating these treasure tokens is creating the problem. Anything that makes them straight through and through, that's what's making them consistent. The fact that they produce mana of any color is the major problem right now with these decks that you're seeing. And so anything that is able to run a treasure token in it, are probably going to outperform any deck that is not right now. There's a lot of decks that I see out there, a lot of black decks too, that make these treasure tokens, and every time the consistency is there. It accelerates you, and the consistency continues. You can stack up enough of these cards that it always has a consistent flow to it. Other things that are in here, like you have Shatterskull Smashing, which is also a land, so in a pinch you can pay 3 life and have a land come into play untapped. That is kind of a key part there. If you always have access to a land that can always do something more, that is why we're seeing a lot of consistency and always those. So a lot of these cards that flip as a land or a spell or a land and a creature, they make your land drops much more viable. And a lot of people like that, because now you're taking out so much of the guessing game of the lands, and you always have an option with them. That's why I personally like them. I personally think these types of Molo, these double-faced cards where it's a land or a spell on the other side, they do make things a little bit more consistent overall playing the game of Magic the Gathering. And that is the key to all of this, is consistency. If you can build a deck that is going to consistently make land and always have the spells that are readily available, that is something that's going to go down, and it's going to make it very viable. Prismari Command, where you're able to pitch 2 cards and well, draw 2 cards, then pitch 2 cards or discard 2 cards. That in itself is it's a nice option to have there, and once again, it makes consistency. And then it also can make those treasure tokens, once again, the consistency of always having the mana available to you is what is making these decks so powerful. There's also the disruption here, which you can put in as a land. You have the Spikefield Hazard, which you can put in as a land. Ideally, when you're running this deck, if you're not dropping a land every turn, you're going to lose with it, and that's the nature of how this is. You're trying to ramp and trying to make these treasures to accelerate your mana rampage and your turn by turn basis, and that's why it is so potent. And that's why I believe he went undefeated through the worlds, even though he had, going into there in the draft sense, he had the lowest record. Expresses in irritation. I can't even say this properly. Anyway, this card for 2 mana, you look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, put one of them on the bottom of your library, and one in exile. One of them in exile. You may play the exiled card this turn. This card, I believe, is what should actually be banned. Expressive Iteration, it's by giving you the option to have 2 cards out of 3 and be able to consistently do something with them. So you put, ideally what you want to do is put your land in the exile zone so you can play the land immediately. Then you're drawing a card for free, and you're putting a third one that you don't actually need to the bottom of your deck. This card is ultimately letting you look at the top 3 cards and letting you draw 2 of them. And for 2 mana, this is absurd. We've got most spells that let you draw 2 cards, either like Prismari Command here, where you draw 2 and then discard 2. That's 3 mana. And then there's there's a couple ones, Deliberate and the Foretelled one. I can't even remember the name of it. There's the Foretell one where you foretell it for 2 and then you cast it for 2, or it's 4. And if you cast it for 4 or the 2 there, it's scry 2, draw 2. And that's generally where things land when you're drawing 2 cards. You want to be in like 4 mana to draw 2 cards is where it's settled and where it needs to be. But when you're able to sit there and look at the top 3 and draw 2 of those cards, this card becomes a very potent spell, and it becomes very much more consistency once again. Also in this deck, the Memory Deluge for 4 mana. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. You put 2 of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Once again, this does the same thing. For 4 mana, you get to draw 2 cards, and you take, and you're looking at the top 4. This does the exact same thing as if you were scrying 2 and drawing 2, and then it has the flashback ability, so you get a later use in it. This card, honestly, for that mana cost is fair. The flashback, though, doesn't need to be there for that. So for it to have flashback, it should have been 1 more to cast in it, just because of how powerful this card actually is. It would have made this card a lot more fair and a lot less reliable than what it is. It's also an instant, so when you have mana open not doing anything with it, this is where you go with that. There's a few counter spells in here. Counter spells are part of the game. They're always being part of that. Consistency is key with it. Dragon's Fire, decent card, gets rid of a lot of creature problems. Thundering Rebruk, again, getting rid of cards that are going to be a problem. There is no actual direct damage in here, so you're mostly winning with like Goldspan Dragon or the Smoldering Egg Ashmount Dragon. And in super late games, in a lot of matches, Hall of the Storm Giants is what is winning the games. This card being a 7/7 blue giant with ward 3, so now you create this land that can't be targeted by anything, and it's the fact that there is a very lack of cards out there that actually that you can target lands with. Why these man lands have become such a potent force in the meta. If you're not running a manland right now in your deck, I'm going to tell you 9 times out of 10 you're probably going to lose, and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunately the way it's come down. So now you're being forced into a snow archetype to run Faceless Haven, or you're being forced to spend wild cards or pick up these lands that ultimately you should not have to run in your decks. If, like I said, if you're not running a manland in your mana base, you're doing it wrong. Fading Hope in blue is probably one of the best removal cards right now, or reversal cards that are making a huge impact. Return target creature from into its owner's hand. If its mana value was 3 or less, scry 1. Notice this says, it does not say non-land creature. So Fading Hope is being used in a lot of cases to bounce these manlands back to the owner hand, and that is why this deck did become number 1. The Fading Hope being able to bounce certain lands, being able to consistently draw cards, and being able to consistently cast spells with a mana base that just happens to grow and shrink every round very easily. There's enough removal here that it just takes down other cards. Looking into the sideboard, if you're up against bigger decks, you're probably bigger go wide decks, you're putting in those Cinderclasms, that's taking them out very quickly. Malevolent Hermit, if you need something to shut things down so your spells don't really get countered and stuff like that. One Environmental Sciences. What is in here for learn that you're getting that? I don't... Oh, it's divide by 0. So you bounce something with divide by 0, and then you go get the Environmental Sciences once again to create that mana base that's going to become more consistent overall. So ultimately, if you want to build a good deck right now, look at treasures. Look at building up something that's going to expand your treasure count and bring it back. Expand it and bring it back. And having this up-down flow in treasures is going to make things ultimately a lot simpler and a lot more consistent down the line. And the fact that this deck has a lot of card draw options to it makes it very, very consistent and viable. Once again, Expressive Iteration is probably where the ban needs to be, because this card just makes it way too consistent, too easy to do things. Alun's Epiphany just needs to go straight through and through, because nothing's worse than having someone chaining 2 or 3 of these together with cloning of spells or stuff like that. But ultimately, this is the winning deck that took down the World's Tournament. You're probably going to see a lot more of this deck, and hopefully this little bit of a breakdown is nice for you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This proud Canadian Phoenix signing off. Have yourselves a great day.